Hello, and welcome to POMA Does, a podcast produced by the Pennsylvania Osteopathic Medical Association. We provide a voice for osteopathic medicine and share insights on issues important to osteopathic physicians, residents, and students, as well as those who embrace the osteopathic philosophy. POMA's mission is to promote the distinctive philosophy and practice of osteopathic medicine for our patients, our members, and the communities we serve. Thanks for tuning in. Hello, and welcome to the POMA Does podcast. My name is Dr. John Kalata. I'm an osteopathic family physician from Erie, Pennsylvania, a POMA past president and member of Digital Engagement Committee. I'm honored tonight to be with Dr. Nick Pennings. Nick is an obesity medicine specialist, board certified family physician, and a close colleague and friend who I'm really happy to be with tonight. So Nick, welcome.
Oh, it's great to be here, John, and I'm very excited to talk about this topic. Obesity treatment, I think, is very osteopathic because you're treating the whole patient. You're helping somebody get healthy. These are the tenets of osteopathic medicine and the reasons why I went into osteopathic medicine, because I think it's a great parallel between obesity medicine and osteopathic medicine.
I'm always curious about how someone over the course of their career morphs their practice into such a way that really benefits them and benefits their patient. Can you tell us a little about what interests you in this specific portion of family medicine?
So I was always interested in helping people get healthy. Like I said, that's why I went into osteopathic medicine, because I really liked the idea that the goal of the physician is to find health. And that was one of A.T. Still's tenets. That was always a particular interest. And I was actually very interested in smoking cessation. And that was a big part of what I did in my practice. But smoking rates went down, obesity rates went up, and people smoke and eat for the same reasons. They're happy, they're sad, they're bored, everybody else is doing it. And so there was a lot of parallels that I saw there. But more importantly, when I started a weight loss program in my office, because I was always looking for something to help patients with obesity, I saw dramatic improvements in their health parameters. I was able to decrease or stop blood pressure medications, diabetes medications, lipid treatments. Patients got better, they felt better, and they would come and they would thank me. Nobody ever thanked me for putting them on a statin. They thank you when you can help improve their health and get to a healthier weight.
That's fantastic. So over the last several years, we've really seen a revolution in weight loss and bariatrics, and patients now have a lot more options than they did and we did as doctors 5-10 years ago, particularly like the GLP-1s as one class of those medicines. Could you just summarize? I know some of our listeners are seasoned doctors and some are maybe early in their practice. So we certainly have residents and students who are listening. Could you talk for just a little bit about where we are right now with some of the weight loss medications that are available?
Well, we certainly have come a long way. The only thing that was really of any significance was phentermine when we were first in practice. A couple things came and went in between there. And then liraglutide and the combination of topiramate and phentermine and the combination of bupropion and naltrexone became available around 2013, 2014. And that started to make a dent and some significant weight loss. Never really raised too many eyebrows, though. But then when semaglutide was approved, that really just changed the whole spectrum of treatment. Weight loss results were much more dramatic. The potency of these medications is much greater. And that really had a profound effect both on healthcare as well as on patients, because for the longest time, we would train physicians how to approach the topic of obesity treatment to patients because it was such a sensitive issue and patients weren't always ready, willing, and able to talk about it. But when these medications got approved, now everybody's coming in. I've got a headache and I need a GLP-1. I've got a cough and I need a GLP-1. I sprained my ankle and I need a GLP-1. It's like everybody now wants to take these medications. So it totally shifted the discussion. And now from something that physicians were bringing up as a topic of discussion is now a topic that patients are bringing up and requesting. So that changes the whole landscape considerably.
It's like a tidal wave some days in the office. We'll just be riding that tidal wave, and the demand for these medications, because they see their neighbor has significant weight loss and significant health benefits, they want to be part of that. So can you speak, sometimes over the course of the day in our practices, Nick, I see a lot of clinical challenges, not just with obtaining the medication. And I think that's a topic that we're all pretty familiar familiar with and how we maybe try to negotiate that. But can you talk about some of the clinical challenges when maybe a patient is able to obtain that medicine, setting expectations and setting some parameters for them as they go and their journey early on, at least?
Well, I think that's a pretty broad topic because one, we have the challenge of patients getting it on their own. So you may not even know the patient is taking the medication, or, they may have started it weeks before they came to see you. And so that I think is a challenge in of itself. And I think because the medications are so readily available, patients don't always understand the importance of the other components of managing weight when you're taking these medications. Because they're so potent, they can decrease your appetite. And there's a real paradigm shift. In the treatment of obesity, we were always talking about how to cut your calories and eat less and exercise more and try to create that negative energy balance. Well, now all of a sudden we have these high potency medications that are suppressing appetite. And now I'm spending as much time making sure my patients are eating enough, that they're eating the right things, that they're doing the right things. And so it's not just writing a prescription. It's not just prescribing a medication. It's really incorporating the medication in a bigger picture of patient care so that the medications, in my mind, are really there just to help the patient make the lifestyle changes they need to make. They're not a weight loss treatment by themselves, that it's essential that they're getting the proper nutrition, that they're getting adequate protein in their diet, typically 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram per day of protein. So that's typically about 80 to 100 grams of protein a day is typically what a patient should consume. They need to make sure they're getting plenty of fiber in their diet. So 25, 30 grams of fiber a day. One of the ways to really meet those requirements is to focus on having a protein and a vegetable at every meal. That is a way of increasing your fiber intake. It's a way of getting all the micronutrients that you need, as well as the macronutrients from the protein and the vegetable too. So those are some important nutritional tips that we want to make sure that our patients are following in order to not do any harm, right? Because that is one of our other tenets in medicine is above all, do no harm. And these medications can do harm if they're not used properly.
That's really helpful because none of us are nutritionists. Well, maybe some of us are, but now we're challenged by patients to really offer them those pieces of education. And in a 15 or 20 minute visit, how do you impart that? I wrote them down because now I'm going to put that on my desk because I think it's really important for us to tell people. They'll ask how much. Corollary to that, Nick, is could you talk about exercise or maybe movement? And now I think that the conversation is open with patients. They're more willing to talk about not only medication, but lifestyle changes, including exercise and movement, and how you approach that conversation with a patient.
So muscle loss has been a hot topic. A lot of attention is drawn because some of the studies have shown significant lean tissue loss. And it's a little bit nuanced in that lean tissue is not all muscle. And when you lose lean tissue, you may be losing some muscle, but really what's more important is, are you losing function? Are you getting weakness? Because when you're measuring these muscle masses, there's intramuscular fat that is lost, which changes the muscle mass. There's a couple different parameters that come into play. And so some of the concerns about muscle loss have been, I think, a little bit exaggerated. And the truth is that you lose muscle anytime you lose weight. So that is a component. But you can definitely develop excessive muscle loss if you're not getting adequate protein in your diet. So that's why you want to hit those targets of, 80 to 100 grams or more a day. You want to make sure that you're doing some sort of resistance exercise because protein by itself doesn't build muscle. It may help minimize muscle loss because your body isn't going to go to your muscle for a source of energy if adequate protein in your diet. But it is essential that you combine that extra protein with some sort of resistance training that is going to help build it or at least maintain muscle mass. And that is something, you want to either be working with weights or you can do body exercises, calisthenics. You can work with an exercise therapist or a skilled personal trainer. But it's important that you incorporate some physical activity to your daily routines.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And I think those small tips, particularly in patients who have obesity, those small tips, going from wherever they are at to something more is really, really helpful.
It is, and sometimes patients are very resistant. They just want to take the shot or now the pill and just lose weight, right? And not do those other things that they need to do. And one of the things that I remind the patients is the results, those 15, 20% weight loss results that were seen in those clinical trials were done with the medication combined with nutritional intervention, regular physical activity, and behavioral therapy. So looking at some of the why people are eating.
That's fantastic. And I think that setting those expectations that it's a lifelong journey for people, I think is really important.
Well, that's the other thing about medication for the treatment of obesity. Many people feel that they want to just take something to jumpstart their weight loss, right? I just want something to get going. And the truth is, the more weight you lose, the harder it becomes to maintain that weight loss. Because as we lose weight, we have internal physiologic processes that regulate our appetite. We have hunger signals, we have satiety signals in our body. And when we're losing weight, the hunger signals go up, the satiety signals go down, and you're more hungry. And that's just natural physiology. And the more weight you lose, the more intense those signals are. In fact, I think that's often why we need to increase doses as we go along, not because the medications lose effectiveness. As you lose more weight, you need more medication to continue that weight loss journey. And so it is important that people look at it as a long-term process and not a short-term process. And so that the medications need to be continued, not just at the beginning of any dietary intervention or not till the end of a dietary intervention, but often for years afterwards.
That was one thing I was going to bring up, Nick, and that's when people get to where they think they want to be from a BMI standpoint, and they've made whatever sort of lifestyle changes they've decided to make. What's been your experience about medication doses and ongoing coaching and visits to the doctor? Like, should they expect to be on these medications ad infinitum, or do you see how they do off the medication like you might do with other medications? What's been your approach to those folks?
Well, these medications help to regulate our appetite, right? They help to decrease our appetite so that we can maintain those lifestyle choices, those healthier lifestyle changes, and not feel hungry. So my approach to that is always asking the patients, how is your appetite being regulated? What's your hunger level? Because I find there's one of three scenarios. Patients get to their goal weight and they're still struggling to eat. Right? They're still like, I just don't feel like eating. I eat because I have to eat, but I'm struggling to eat. That patient, I'm going to cut their dose back. Some patients are, I feel really good here. I'm not hungry. I'm able to eat regularly throughout the day. I can eat a small portion, feel comfortable. My weight's holding steady. I feel good at this dose. And I would keep them at that dose. Some patients will say, I'm down to my goal weight, but boy, I'm really struggling. I'm, thinking about food all the time. I'm always feeling hungry and I'm doing it, but I'm struggling. That patient, I might increase the dose. So listening to your patients and asking about their hunger level and managing the medications according to what their hunger level is and adjusting accordingly. Just like we would adjust somebody's blood pressure. If it goes down too low, we're going to cut back on the medicine. If it's still high, we're going to add a little bit more. And if it's where we want it to be, we'll keep it at the same dose.
That's super helpful because patients sometimes will ask me what happens in a month, a year, and I think it's a matter of having that conversation.
Right. And I tell them I don't know, but we'll ask about it. And if it's appropriate to lower the dose, we will. But understand that if we lower the dose, you may be hungry again, and then you're going to be struggling.
Yeah. Well, you're a physician, not a magician, Nick. I use that a lot. And I think that's kind of helpful because none of us can predict the future. And I think taking each patient as an individual is really an important piece because you just don't know how they're going to react later on. You talked earlier on about the patients who are accessing medications online. Can you talk about the safety of that and the level of comfort we should have with that as practicing doctors? We know what's approved and we know what's not approved. I just have a problem sometimes with patients who are taking potions that they get online or from some med spa down the street. I get a little bit worried about that because I feel like I have no control and no input into their care.
Not managing it, right? So you've got some non-professional who has no experience, no proper training administering a medication, which to me, it should be illegal, right? Somebody at a med spa can't can't prescribe diabetes medications. I don't know how they get away with this. So that is an issue. The other issue is, where is the medication coming from? You'll ask compounding agents, where do they get their product from? And they don't tell you, they don't know. When a pharmaceutical company gets FDA approval, they go through the clinical studies to prove efficacy and safety. They work with the FDA in the whole manufacturing process. They inspect it even before the first medication comes off the line. They have to monitor safety and efficacy afterward, post-marketing analysis. Compounding companies don't have to do any of that. They don't have to get it approved. They don't have to get it. They're not supervised. They can register with the FDA. Then registering with the FDA just means that the FDA can come and inspect them. And typically they do that every 1 to 3 years. But FDA registered doesn't mean it's made in the USA. It could be made anywhere in the world and be registered with the FDA. And it doesn't mean that they're going to be inspecting that facility before that medication gets released. So you don't know if that's been in a facility that's been inspected or not inspected. And you get these pop-up labs that make it, and, they are FDA registered. And when the FDA gets ready to come, they'll go someplace else. So there's a lot of opportunity for deception there. And so the safety of these medications is very questionable. And one of the big concerns that raise is that they are peptides, right? So they're proteins. Proteins can trigger an immune response. The compounded agents are more likely to produce an immune response and antigenicity, which will neutralize their effect so that, the medication won't work. You have to worry about that aspect as well. And that's something that's not really talked about very much. So overall, there's a lot of concerns about the compounded agents. The semaglutide pill has a special ingredient in it that allows for the absorption of this into the stomach. Because it's a peptide, it protects that absorption of that compound. And if it's not in there, you can take a semaglutide pill and it won't do anything. Your body will just digest it. So that is another factor. And then all these other ways of taking it, sublingual and patches, there's no evidence to support any of those things that they're safe or effective.
I think having a trusted physician to really manage that, I think, is essential, because you don't have any of that worry or that uncertainty if that's the case.
I think there's parallels, which also is something that's not very well regulated. There's some 120 different ingredients that can be in CBD oil. So when people are saying they're using these things, you have no idea what they're taking or how much they're taking.
That's the munchie receptor that's not well recognized right now. So,
right.
Nick, you mentioned earlier, in maybe some earlier conversations that you and I have had, about some of the new things on the horizon with regard to GLPs. Can you talk about what you might know that's on the horizon, not only in terms of weight loss, but maybe some other utility in terms of CV benefit and things like that?
Yeah. So the first agent to come out was a GLP-1. So that was liraglutide and semaglutide. And there's some other GLP-1 agents in the pipeline. So I think we may see other similar agents. The next agent to come out was a combined GLP-1 GIP receptor agonist. And that was tirzepatide. That had higher potency, maybe a little less GI side effects, although that's a variable kind of response. But, when you're starting to see 20% weight loss, that was pretty dramatic, and that's gained a lot of attention. There's another agent in the market that's a triple agonist, right? So this is going to be a GLP-1, GIP, and glucagon receptor agonist. So it's hitting on all three different receptors, and that has shown 25% or higher weight loss in clinical trials. And so that's retatrutide, and that is something that will likely be approved sometime in the next year or so. So GLP, GIP, and now glucagon. And the glucagon receptor is also combined with GLP. Survodutide is a product that is being investigated and showed some very good phase 3 results. Maybe some increased GI side effects, not really sure how severe that's going to be. But the glucagon receptor seems to be particularly good for fatty liver and reducing fatty liver accumulation. So getting more attention to MASLD and MASH, and there are likely going to be specific treatments for that. And I think one of the things that you're going to see different about medications that are coming down the pipeline is their indications are going to be for weight loss and other things. So we know semaglutide is approved for MASLD and MASH, and it's approved for secondary prevention of cardiovascular disease. Tirzepatide is approved for obstructive sleep apnea, and we'll see more of that these medications will be indicated perhaps perhaps for osteoarthritis, or perhaps cardiovascular risk reduction, or other adiposity-related diseases. So that is another interesting component there. Another receptor that is being tested is the amylin receptor. And so CagriSema showed good results. That's a combination of semaglutide, a GLP-1, and cagrinotide, which is a amylin receptor agonist. There's a few other amylin receptor agonists that are also in the pipeline. So those are going to be some of the agents. There's also a GIP receptor antagonist. So that maritide is a combination of a GLP-1 and a GIP receptor antagonist. And that too suppresses appetite, perhaps by enhancing GLP-1 effect. But so that's another pathway. I think the bottom line is we're going to see a lot more options, and hopefully with that will come improved access and reduced costs, because those are some of the big barriers that we are seeing in the marketplace now.
It's interesting. I think all of these other ancillary benefits are so patient-centered and so helpful, and I think it has doctors excited, patients smiling, and insurance companies shaking in their boots. They're going to have to eventually cave, because if something's reducing CV risk or osteoarthritis or a potentially fatal liver disease, you can't ignore that for forever.
Right. This is not, a lifestyle choice that is sometimes obesity is unfortunately still labeled as. These are, diseases that they already approve other treatments for and have to consider this. And that's been a gateway to getting it approved for Medicare patients, which are now, an exciting thing that happened this month is that Medicare is covering these medications for a lot of patients.
That's exciting. Got to jump through a couple hoops, I suppose, but it is exciting. And patients are asking about that 1 week into it. So as the word spreads.
Yes.
But anything to get these medicines for patients. And I think for me, the more interesting thing is how the availability of these medications opens the conversation about BMI, about movement, about lifestyle for people maybe that weren't that willing to talk about it before. I don't know if you found that in your practice, but certainly they're much more willing to just talk about it rather than ignore it or just make that a tertiary part of the conversation because of the stigma.
Right. And, the stigma is a big factor, because for years, people were just told, well, just eat less and exercise more. And that's true that eating less and exercise more will help you to lose weight, but it also make you more hungry and make you feel miserable. And so that's why it doesn't work by itself. And that's the role of medication in there. So I do think that's an important part. It did stimulate the conversation, as I mentioned early on, that patients are asking for it, but that poses new challenges now is how do you incorporate that into your busy schedule? When a patient wants to, start this medication, can't you just write me a script? I could just get it online, or you could write me a script. What's the big deal, right? And it is a big deal because these medications are super potent. You can have significant complications if they're not taken properly. If you take it too high a dose or go up too fast, you can get severe GI distress. It can even result in acute kidney injury. So, you have to be very cautious about this. You have to combine it with the lifestyle components so that you don't create a malnourished situation that causes excess muscle loss or some nutrient deficiency or vitamin deficiency. So they really need to be done under the care of a physician. And I think one of the ways when patients bring that up as an add-on thing, wherever possible, I think it's really helpful to try to create a weight-focused visit where you bring that patient back specifically to talk about the use of the medication and the use of it properly, and to take a whole patient approach, not just prescribing a medication, but having a dietary strategy, having a physical activity strategy, and making sure that, they don't have an underlying eating disorder or some other thing that might complicate their therapy.
That's really important. I think, not to be flippant about it, but eating the pie in smaller pieces with anything we do in healthcare, it's unrealistic to expect you're going to have that conversation. Oh, by the way, as your hands on the door visits. Nick, if you had one piece of advice for a physician who's having challenges with GLPs and the conversation with patients who have obesity-related problems, what would it be?
Well, I think it's having a strategy of managing the patients on these medications. So how do you incorporate that nutritional advice? Is it handouts? Is it, a staff member that maybe is a particular interest in it? Is it knowing your resources in your community where you can refer that patient for nutritional counseling or working with a dietitian? But having, some sort of plan to be able to make specific recommendations for dietary interventions that will benefit the patient. And also physical activity plans. So one of the things I have in my office is an exercise prescription pad, and it follows that FIT model: frequency, intensity, time, type, and enjoyment. And I just ask the patients, are you interested in exercise? What will you do? How long will you do it for? What intensity can you do it at? What can you do to make it fun? And write it specifically down, and I hand it to the patient. So that exercise prescription pad, the American College of Sports Medicine has examples of those. They can be very helpful for coming up with a plan. And then also make sure you're managing that patient's appetite. You're not just dosing a medication to get to some magical dose. You're managing and regulating their appetite. And some patients don't need more than the initial dose. And some people, the highest dose is still not effective enough. So you have to be listening to the patient and asking about their appetite and asking them what they're eating. I do a 24-hour recall in every visit. What have you eaten in the last 24 hours? And that's usually a pretty good reflection of what their caloric intake is.
It's interesting to have that conversation. Patients, when they really recall it, their eyes sometimes get wide and they're like, maybe that third piece of pizza wasn't the best idea. It's not enough to say ice cream. It's, a cup or a bowl or a gallon.
Yeah.
It's all part of it. So that whole patient approach, Nick, it is very osteopathic. And I think in this field, particularly really useful. So Nick, I want to thank you. It was really great to talk to you. Good to catch up. Good to see you at Reunion last month. And on behalf of POMA and our listeners, thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me, John.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of POMA Does. Be sure to subscribe to POMA Does wherever you listen to your podcasts, and tell your friends and colleagues to tune in. Learn more about osteopathic medicine and POMA on our webpage, www.poma.org, and join the conversation on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. Or email us at poma@poma.org. We'd love to hear from you. Join us next time for another edition of POMA Does.